Welcome once again to the official MUFON podcast. I'm Richard Beckwith. Now, I know many of you have been wondering where the podcast has been. Well, if you'll give me just a moment, I'll explain where it's been for the last little while here. I have been working on a book, and it is done now. The book is called Need to Know: The History, Law, and Practice of American Secrecy. It is now available on Amazon.com, and it is also available at my Shopify page in varying formats. So get a hold of a copy today if you have the ability to do so, or if you have the desire to do so. Read it, leave a comment, and I'd be more than happy to hear from you. Nonetheless, that's what I have been up to for the last several months. This book is consistent with the presentation I gave last year at the MUFON Symposium in Dallas, and it is a discussion about the legal foundation for American secrecy, how it evolved, how America keeps secrets from its own citizens, and then I do spend a bit of time talking about secrecy related to the UAP or UFO phenomenon. That being said, as the sole writer, director, and producer of the MUFON podcast, it's somewhat difficult to do 400 different things at once, especially as a full-time attorney and also as a member of the MUFON board of directors, as well as some other organizations. I sort of have to focus on one thing at a time. So we're back to the podcast, at least for a while. And today, we're honored to have a guest whose career spans the realms of Hollywood and the cosmos. You may know him as the relentless Frank Castle on The Punisher, the intrepid Detective Miller in The Expanse, or from his roles in The Mist and Deep Blue Sea. But beyond the silver screen, Thomas Jane has embarked on a profound journey into the world of UFOs and the paranormal. As the keynote speaker for the upcoming 2025 MUFON Symposium in Cincinnati, Thomas will discuss hypotheses on NHI origins and compare the data with new reports and whistleblower accounts. He is also going to discuss newer evidence that offers some tentative conclusions about NHI origins. He's also the author of the forthcoming book, A Human's Guide to Visiting Aliens, offering a unique blend of scientific insight and speculative thought on humanity's place in the universe. Thomas Jane's passion for the unknown is not new. From creating the sci-fi comic series Bad Planet to his candid discussions recently on UFOs and disclosure, he's been a vocal advocate for exploring the mysteries that lie beyond our understanding. So, buckle up as we journey through the enigmatic with Thomas Jane, actor, director, author, and seeker of truths beyond the stars. Thomas Jane, welcome to the MUFON podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you showing up.
Happy to be here, I got to tell you. Keeps digging ditches.
Yeah, I understand. I've had to dig a few ditches in my time, and I'm happy to have you here because we share a common interest, and I think that will become more evident, obviously, when you make your presentation this summer at the MUFON Symposium. But we share a common interest, a couple of common interests, in particular in UFOs and also in some level of the paranormal. And so I want to talk to you about a couple of those things. But I want to talk to you maybe a little bit about what you're going to be talking about at the symposium. And then at some point, I want to talk about your book, A Human's Guide to Visiting Aliens. Mm-hmm. So we'll have to talk about that a little bit. But Thomas, I think it's important for our audience to understand why you started talking about this kind of thing. Why did you start talking about UFOs and paranormal type things?
Well, that's a good question because it's there's still a pretty good percentage of the population that still thinks it's crazy talk. The only reason I started talking about it is because I see the end of the runway. I see a world where we are going to most of us who are alive today will be a part of a what Avi Loeb calls a neo-Copernican revolution. It's happening. We are on the cusp of coming to the world-shaking realization that we are just one among many of intelligent civilizations in the universe. And that's a huge global shift in consciousness. And it implies ultimately a complete sort of restructuring of how we view ourselves and our society. So we all know that society needs to change. We can't keep doing business the way we've been doing it. It's unsustainable in a finite world. But there's also, there's some incredible reasons for why we would want to sort of reevaluate our society. And that's literally to join a cosmic community. Now, whether or not that means we're all going to, get flying cars and start zipping off to Canis Minor, I don't think so, at least not right away. But there will be benefits. There'll be incredible benefits.
Thomas, do you think that based upon what you're seeing in the world, that there is an effort to stop that, there is sort of a, as you might call it, a battle for disclosure between the forces of darkness and the forces of light? Do you see that happening?
It is. I mean, I don't think that the forces of darkness would frame it that way, but you could call them conservatively trying to hang on to the world that they know and the world that they've got. And for some people, that's been very, very good to them. The structures, the energy regimes that we have in place have made a lot of people very, very rich, and they are on top of the power structures. And, in our world, that means money. And most of the money comes from two things: war and oil. And the wars over the oil. And then the rebuilding of the destruction that we create to control the oil, right? So this is a really functional system for those who control it. For the rest of us, it's not so good.
It reminds me of that movie, Why We Fight. You probably remember that film, and it essentially uses a number of world leaders to make precisely that point that we fight for the purpose of money. It's an entire machine, a regime set up really beyond a normal person's control to make money from war and death and the manufacturing and selling of war machines.
It runs our world. It literally runs the world. It's unsustainable. It's destructive. Everybody knows that. Nobody can stop it. The crack in the dike, the only crack in the dike that I can see is the UFO, the realization that not only are we not alone and unconscious participants in a cosmic ecology, but that we're actually living under a ceiling of suppression. Okay. Take the UFO off the table. We would, if we didn't live under this artificial ceiling of suppression, we would have plasma generators. We would have learned to tap into the 0 point field. The academics will tell you that's impossible. That's a bunch of bullshit. They're lying. And one of the hard sort of realizations that we have to make is that external pressures have forced academia to lie to us. Okay, they've cut off a whole section of physics, and that lies exactly at the intersection between relativity and quantum mechanics. That there is, and just now we're starting to hear about things like extended electrodynamics, right? things that T. Townsend Brown was studying in the 30s, that Babson and Bainson had started a small group of physicists to work on anti-gravity. The key to anti-gravity is tapping into the 0-point field. So they kind of go hand in hand as far as I can tell, the research that I've done. You need a hell of a lot of energy to create an anti-gravity field. And the most efficient way to do that, you can do it with a nuclear machine. That's really messy and dirty. But the most efficient way to do that is to tap into the 0-point field. And that can be done through extended electrodynamics. And so people can Google that term and sort of go down a rabbit hole of people who are interested in that kind of stuff. I'm fascinated by it. But we have seen people reach these conclusions in the past and they disappear. Okay. There's the I forget his name. The Naga? The Naga coil. So a gentleman invented something like a plasma generator with a coil that tapped energy from the vacuum, and it also exhibited anti-gravity effects. He was killed, but you don't need to be a 0-point energy, inventor to get killed. There's a guy named Thomas Ogle, who in the 70s, he knocked a hole in the gas tank of his lawnmower, and he fiddled around. He was a handy guy. He fiddled around and he created a bypass. So he sort of jammed a tube into that hole and then created this bypass, and his lawnmower ran for 90 hours. So he patented this. All of the energy company, the car companies were interested. He was being wooed. He wanted to make a deal. He almost made a deal, but then he found out that they were going to take his invention and shelve it. So he's like, I won't. They offered him $25 million in the 70s. And he said, no, I want this to go out, and actually make a difference in the world. And a week later, he was shot outside of a bar. He actually survived. And then I think a few days after that, he was found dead of an overdose of pain pills and alcohol.
Oh, my God.
So, and there's Colonel, I think his name is Colonel Brown. Brown invented something you fit over your carburetor, and it also extended the gas mileage. It quadrupled your gas mileage. And he was destroyed, and his lab was burned down. So we don't need the UFO to get us there. But
I think a lot of what you're talking about falls under what they called the Patent Secrecy Act, or the Invention Secrecy Act.
National Secrecy Act.
Right. This is actually the National Invention Secrecy Act, which has to do with sequestering inventions. I'm somewhat familiar with that because I provided some legal advice and counsel to Dr. Greer's Orion project. And so we had that experience with the Stan Meyer technology. The guy
Incredible.
that did the dune buddies on water.
He was able to separate the hydrogen and the oxygen in a low energy way. Because the scientists said, well, you would just take too much energy to separate the molecules in water.
And hydrolysis.
You needed pure water. You needed this incredibly pure water that had no minerals in it, and it was a pain in the ass. And Meyer was able to do it cheaply with tap water.
Yeah. The way that's portrayed, the way that's portrayed in Dr. Greer's movie, that Sirius movie, that's actually how things took place. Somebody swooped in and took hold of it. But I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead and continue there.
Well, you can so this is the control system that we're living in. The fight for UFO secrecy, a lot of people frame it under free energy, which has truth to that. But my point is that we don't need the UFO to get us the inventions to change the world. We already have all the technology we need to change the world. What's stopping us is what I call the dark state, right? Those are the cats that created the National Secrecy Act in 47 that created the intelligence agencies all around right after Roswell. I don't think that's coincidental. And, Catherine Austin Fitts said that she couldn't find $21 trillion that have been siphoned out of the American taxpayer budget. And that's gone on to create what Richard Dolan calls the breakaway civilization. That's no joke. This very small enclave is controlling the rest of society. And that's the way it's going to be until we're able to expose them. And that's where the UFO comes into play.
Yeah. I'm hoping that represents a sort of as you were saying earlier, a raising of our consciousness. And I do think there's somewhat of a battle taking place. I think that, let's face it, whoever gets a hold of this technology and is able to control it in the way that they desire, it's world dominating technology, which, points to why they do it, in my opinion. And what I'd like to ask you about is your own experiences. You've had at least, some experiences in your life that led you to this. And I think that you've maybe said in past interviews that you wouldn't have talked about this before about 2017 or 2018 or so. What was it? What was it about that period of time that made you decide that you wanted to start talking about these sorts of things?
Well, it was the shift in consciousness. It was the New York Times, Leslie Kean, Ralph Blumenthal article that came out in the New York Times in December. Actually, I think that came out 48 years to the day that they shut down Project Blue Book. Or maybe it was the day that the Condan Report came out. Anyway, it was an auspicious date. If you look it up, it's actually, I think it's the day they released the Condan Report, or because it was
a historical date of some nature.
They picked a really interesting, maybe 50 years, but anyway, it was a really cool anniversary that they decided to release this New York Times article, and it changed the world. And since then we're slowly sort of progressing towards the realization. Now most people have heard something about these congressional hearings, or David Grush or Luis Elizondo. So it's time to make our voices heard. Every voice counts. I've been looking into this subject for 15 years. That's when I had my own experiences, and they changed my life. I was not interested in any of this stuff at all. I had a busy life and a career, and that I enjoy very much. And it was only through getting hit on the head by the universe that sent me down the rabbit hole to sort of say, what the hell was that? And how do I explain that? Yeah. And that led me to the UFO phenomenon. And I was surprised, as most people are, that there was just so much information. I mean, you just scratch the surface, you peel back that first layer of the onion, and suddenly you're looking at this 80 years of cover up and disinformation. And it's surprising, because then that tells you that you're living in this weird matrix reality, where I did not realize that I was that my consciousness, or the boundaries of my reality, were so carefully curated. Okay. So the boundaries of reality have been curated by the institutions that we trust. Now, trust in institutions is going way down because of these digital communication devices. Suddenly, we're so much more connected, and we have access to so much more information that it's becoming a lot harder to sort of curate those boundaries, right? So now the game is, how do we incorporate the access that humanity has to information and still maintain these boundaries somehow, right? Maybe we can expand them a little bit. Maybe we can blur the edges so much that it just looks crazy, and so that'll keep a lot of people away. So we've got, AI chat bots who are in there, the disinformation program. The game has shifted, but there's the goal is the same. There's still trying to hang on to control. We've got this shaky moment right now, right, where we've forced them to change the control system that we're operating under. And they're looking for a new system that will allow them to continue playing the game of war and energy and destruction and rebuilding. And let's keep that going, but we'll just sort of shift the boundaries a little bit. And
you're familiar with
this is
what
a weak moment.
You're familiar with what
take advantage of.
You're familiar with what Carol Rosin said. Do you remember who Dr. Carol Rosin is?
Yeah.
And this is, I think, Thomas, is exactly what you're talking about. I think, she spoke about as Werner von Braun told her that that's the last card,
That's right.
the UFO card, which helps them to, I guess, justify putting weapons in space, nuclear weapons in space.
It's going to be really hard to play that card. I don't, maybe back in the day, von Braun was speaking before the age of digital technology, before the age of instant communication, before we had access to so much so quickly. It's very hard to pull off a Project Bluebeam these days. So while that may have been in the cards when von Braun, was around, and certainly, I mean, they've come up with crazier stuff, right? They wanted to blow up a commercial airliner to start a war with Cuba, So I'm no doubt that was being considered, but you couldn't pull that off today, in my opinion.
You mentioned that you had an experience 15 or 16 years ago that kind of set you off, and that's kind of what I wanted to get to. Do you feel comfortable talking about that? What can you tell us about that experience?
That experience, because it is, the closest thing I can describe it to would be a religious experience. It's there's something sacred about having an experience like that. It changed my life, and it ultimately, and I might write about it at some point, and just to put it on the record. I think it should be on the record, and I will write it down. But talking about it is sort of diminishes its power.
I understand.
And
suffice it to say that you don't feel like sharing it right now, but it was something that opened up your mind.
I think there's millions of us that have been confronted with something that was intelligent, but that was not from our world, and we, go looking for answers. Now, I think there's a million different ways to react to something like that. And they're all legitimate, including just sort of like putting that in a box and forgetting about it because I've got stuff to do. And that's a legitimate reaction, for living in the world that we live in. For me, it sent me down a rabbit hole to just try to discover what kind of universe we really live in. And it turns out that that's an incredibly consequential question for the survival of human society. That's true. I believe that 100%. We cannot look. We live in a curated reality that cannot continue. And if we let the curated reality continue, human beings being who they are, be just human nature, they will take advantage of that to their own detriment. It's like a virus. They will destroy the host if we let it.
This sounds
just what viruses do.
This sounds exactly like what Matthew Brown, the recent whistleblower, was talking about. He was saying this very thing, that we live in this in a sort of matrix like reality that's perhaps even more realistic and more comfortable, even perhaps than the matrix portrayed in the movies, but a sort of curated reality, as you said, nonetheless. Now, there must have been a process that led to you starting to think like this, because I've always said, and I've had discussions with folks about whether or not humanity is ready to learn this truth, because a lot of us, our own personal journeys have led to some rather profound changes in our ways of thinking. And so I'm wondering what that journey's been like for you. Because it sounds like there was a point in your life when you just thought this stuff was just crazy. But then, you slowly began to realize that, oh my God, this stuff is real. And so what's that journey been like for you?
It's been an incredible journey, and in hindsight, wouldn't change it for the world. I'm incredibly grateful to have sort of glimpsed what's the book, Glimpses of Other Realities. It's a great couple of books, by the way. It's been all of the stages of grief I've gone through, denial, anger, sadness, bargaining, all of that happens. There's also, I think the biggest challenge is sort of not being able to, you sort of start living in a puppet world where there's certain topics that you can't broach with friends and family, and when you do, you just kind of sound like a nut. So I learned to kind of keep my mouth shut. It was a private study, it was the invisible college, as it's been described, and I think when the dam broke a little bit and opened up the space to start to have the conversation, and that really happened like in 2020, and then after the pandemic woke a lot of people up, and that's what woke up a lot of folks, and they were like, wait a second, because they changed their story so many times, and they were trying to fill everybody with some unprovable weird experimental medicine, and the way that when we came out of that, people were a lot more open to the idea that we may live in a curated faux reality, and
certainly our media plays a role in that. And it's easy to see. It's easy to see this, sort of curated reality. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about as we progress through this conversation is your book. You have a book, and it's called "Human's Guide to Visiting Aliens." And so I want to talk a little bit about that. Has the book been published? Is it out now?
No, it's not out now. I'm editing the damn book. I'm really spend most of my time working on this thing because I need to get it done. Yeah, I'm on the third draft. I'm excited about the contents, what's in the thing, and I try to lay it out, for people who are in a position to have sort of recently woken up to the idea that we're not alone, and try to, instead of dealing with, so many books have been written about whether or not the thing is real and what the evidence is and all that. I approach the book from the get-go that what does this mean for it is real. We do have visiting aliens. We are part of a cosmic ecology. So what does it mean for us? And what do we know about the visitors, and why they might be here? So they're the big questions of ufology. I'm trying to tackle the big questions of ufology to try to, in a more personal level. There's a lot of wonderful books written about disclosure and what that might mean for society in a socioeconomic and political level, which is fascinating. But I deal with what it means for us as people, sort of the journey that we make through this life and how that would change our society. And what kind of societies may be interacting with us and why.
Mm-hmm. Now, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that you've focused some of your energy on, in particular, on contact cases, cases where folks allegedly, have some kind of direct contact with, non-human intelligences, alien intelligences. Are there any cases in particular that interest you in that regard?
Oh yeah, there's a bunch, that I try to get into. I try to deal with the cases that aren't as well known to ufologists. So when people pick up the book, I'll turn them on to some cases that aren't as well known. Preston Dennett does wonderful work in digging up old cases, and I'm surprised at just how many of them there are. I mean, my God, we're talking thousands upon thousands of contact cases, not just seeing lights in the sky, not just seeing discs landing in a field with little beings. These are full-on contact cases, interactions between human beings and our visitors. James Harder. So that's complex, and it takes a long time to try to wrap your mind around that. I'm kind of stunned by the diaspora of different species that seem to be visiting us. There are literally hundreds over the years since the 50s. Those kind of cases have dropped off in recent years. And I think that that's no accident, as our digital communication and cell phone technology, I think that has an impact on how aliens choose to interact.
You remember Clifford Stone, right?
Yeah.
I think he commented at one time that when he was in the program that there were 57 different species, and I've heard many different numbers. And one of the things, though, that stood out to me about what he said was that some of the species you wouldn't even recognize as being a life form if you didn't know that they were, there or whatever, So
well, that makes sense. Yeah, there seems to be an incredible spectrum. I focus on the humanoid cases, for sure. I think that has sort of the most to teach us, or maybe it's just because that's what we can relate to. But I think there's been a couple of hundred cases, species at least, that have been described in the literature. Dr. James Harder divided up visiting aliens into two groups. The first group, he said, and he worked with, he was the research director for APRO, the oldest ufological organization run by Jim and Carol Lorenzen. And so Harder worked with about 100 different contactees, and he found that he could divide aliens up into two groups. One were, he said, were sort of transitory. They weren't as well versed in the human animal as other groups, but that this group was larger, that they tended to sort of show up and, as explorers or scientists, do some experiments, maybe grab a human and work with them for a little bit and then take off, and you'd never see them again. And that was the larger group, group one. And group two was a smaller group, but they were more technologically sophisticated, and that they were kind of reported more often. So they were kind of here, and they're part of the program, whatever that may be. But there are ongoing interactions, and that includes the gray, the praying mantis, this reptilian type, and then the Nordics, the fully human aliens. Those are some of the group two that seem to have a more long-term interest. He said that they were more sophisticated, and he found a correlation between a species' technological evolution and their benevolence, which he thought was interesting.
Elaborate on that a little bit. I'm interested in that notion, because I think that one of the things that comes into the play in the issues that I'm interested in involve the ethical considerations, and so what do you think about the ethics of these other civilizations? In other words, do they have any consideration at all for humans? Or are we nothing more than something to be studied? Or are we talking about many different civilizations on many different levels of technology that look at us in many, many, many different ways, among which could be that we are, just insects, if you will. But what do you think about that notion?
I think both are true. I think we do have a wide variety who come here for a wide variety of different reasons. That said, they they appear to follow similar guidelines in interacting with the human animal. They do keep a relatively low profile. Injuries have certainly occurred, but
I'm thinking of Colaris.
And that's sort of the exception to the rule.
Yeah.
I agree. Where that may have been a particularly feisty group who came here for a short amount of time and caused some trouble. And then, maybe they had a good talking to by some other aliens that are here and they left. At least we can hope they left. They haven't. We have this one report of some pretty nasty aliens that were doing some nasty stuff for a short period of time. Not really sure where to fit that in, because that's a little bit of an outlier. I don't see a lot of evidence for vicious, evil aliens. However, that doesn't mean that ultimately aliens wouldn't cause harm to us. But if they did, I can boil this down to what we know, that we're, as a humanity, we're interested in the benefit of humankind, hopefully, and then that we have a lot of problems maintaining that, especially when we're being taken advantage of by a control system and the dark state. But ultimately, humanity strives for ethical considerations that benefit all of mankind. And I think I call it a cosmic ecology, they also would make efforts to benefit the cosmic ecology. Now, one of those things may be to manage younger technological civilizations like ourselves. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that we would interpret their actions as good. Say you have two groups of aliens come to Earth, and the first group is interested in promoting life in the universe, right? They're like, we protect life, we nurture life, we want life to grow, and wherever we can create more life, or negentropy, the opposite of entropy, Wherever we can create negentropy in the universe, that's sort of our mission, and that's what we do. And the second group is more self-serving. They're interested in resources. They're interested in, getting as many followers as they can to help them in their endeavor to sort of conquer planets and create a galactic empire,
sort of a Borg, kind of like the Borg.
Well, that doesn't mean that they're they're interested in sort of like turning everybody into a hive mind, but they're interested in recruiting as many beings and consciousness as they can to further their aims, which ultimately are self-serving, right? So the first group, the negentropic life-enhancing group, comes down here, and they see what we're doing, and we're essentially destroying the planet and making a lot of war. And we obviously cannot continue on the path that we are going on. I'm putting climate change aside. I don't understand the climate. I don't think anybody does. I don't think anybody can. And I think that's become politicized. But, we're certainly running out of resources. We cause a hell of a lot of havoc and kill people. And our social systems are degrading. Cancer is on the rise. So this first group could come down and say, you know what? Life in the universe would be better off if the humans either never got out of their little cage that they've created for themselves, or better, didn't exist. Because if they weren't around, we could rewild the Earth. The Earth itself may be much more valuable to the first group of negentropic, life-enhancing, creation-oriented aliens without us. So they may create a hybrid breeding program, infiltrate our society, and then at some point turn us off. And then now they've got a beautiful planet that they can rewild, and their mission to create more life in the universe would have been successful. So good aliens with the good of the universe in mind may not be so good to humanity.
You're getting exactly to the crux of my question, which is the ethics behind the whole thing, because it may be that humanity, as you and I know it, are maybe secondary considerations, that the survival of our particular species and our particular genetic line may not be necessarily in the best interests of the universe.
That's right. And the second group who, are interested in creating followers, so they come down and they're like, hey, look what we got. We got these incredible anti-gravity zero-point energy machines. Here, take them, use them, create, and so that you can then join us in conquering the rest of the galaxy. So we can't know the answer, right? But what we do know is that we've had 80 years to figure this stuff out. So somebody is giving us the time to make up our own mind, right? But if we're too hard-headed and we just can't seem to break through the control systems that have, kept us in service to the energy regime and the war regime, then we may run out of time at some point. I think we may be out of time limit. And I think maybe the drone situation that we just had at the end of 2024 into 2025 may have been a little reminder, a little wake-up call. Hey, guys, get with it. You've got a limited amount of time to knock off the dirty work and get with the program. And if you don't, well, then you've shown us what kind of civilization you are. And therefore, we do the math and decide that, the universe is better off without you in it. But I do think that if there is free will in the universe, if we are gifted with free will, and I think we are, then we have a choice, and it's up to us. We can wake up and smell the coffee. Or we can choose that it's just too much of a pain in the ass, or I'm too selfish, or I've got other stuff going on, or I didn't know it was so important. Wait, nobody told me. You're dead. So
well, one of the things that's come out of your investigations, and one of the things I think that you think will become important is the human race coming to grips with the notion that we have telepathic abilities, that these are innate to our existence, and that all these things sort of play together. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that. On first of all, why you believe that the phenomenon of I guess telepathy is real, taking into consideration that we're hearing a lot about that relative to the UFO/UAP phenomenon in the so-called psionics, or the use of psionics to draw in UAPs. But I'm interested in why you think that's a real phenomenon and what sort of implications you think that it has.
Yeah, the weird just doesn't end, does it? I got into UFOs. I got into the cover-up. I was blown away. I read Richard Dolan's books. I was convinced. So I started looking into cases. Anyone who looks into cases discovers that most alien contact is done telepathically. So I went, what the hell is this telepathy stuff? You have to go through this phase of like, all these people must be crazy, or maybe they're misremembering. You have to do a lot of research to just figure out what the hell is going on. So I started looking into Dean Radin. I said, well, okay, is there any evidence for any of this telepathy stuff on our planet? And it turns out there's 100 years of evidence for telepathy and psi phenomenon and psychic phenomenon on our planet, and that it is being suppressed for the same reasons they're suppressing the UFO stuff, because it threatens the energy regimes and the control system that protects the energy regime, right? Because telepathy and remote viewing is doesn't work very well when you're trying to create a huge lie that everyone's going to follow.
Think about this, Thomas. If everyone could read everyone else's thoughts,
right.
Then there would be no room for guile. No room for deception.
Lying. Right. There's a huge shift there, because then your personal privacy is being violated. Now, I understand that it doesn't have to be. It's not like somebody's going to turn a switch and suddenly everybody's private life is going to be exposed to the world. I think it's going to be much more gradual than that. From my understanding and my research, there are aliens that do have a private sense of self, and they can still communicate telepathically only what they want to. Now, other beings like the Gray, you don't have a choice. They do a little neural engagement, and you're an open book. But I don't see evidence of having to live in a society where everybody is exposed all the time. At least not at first. There'll be a transition phase.
Well, I think in a society like that, I think it's possible, but you would certainly not have to care whether someone saw you naked or
ultimately. Ultimately, there's nothing more liberating. Ultimately, there is nothing more liberating, and that's probably why some aliens they say the humans receive this overwhelming sense of love. Some of that may be cognitive manipulation for sure. As Dr. Harder says, well, why not? I mean, okay, maybe it is cognitive manipulation. It's still a friendly thing to do. Fill you with this unconditional love. Who wouldn't want that? So that is the ultimate sort of reward of a telepathic society, is this overwhelming acceptance and feeling of belonging. We have a long way. We have a long way before we get there.
I heard Whitley Strieber saying something the other day about. He said, and I don't take in stock everything necessarily that Whitley Strieber says, although I have enjoyed his books and so forth. But he said that in his opinion that there are speaking and non-speaking species, species that, vocalize their languages, but and other species that their whole method of communication is non-verbal. and due to some level of a shared consciousness. But he sort of intimated that the difference between the speaking and non-speaking species, and one of the reasons that some of the visitors are interested in us, is because the non-speaking species aren't as creative, because they essentially work as one mind, even though they're, some of them are benevolent, as you say. But I think that, you alluded to something earlier about, there being, 200 species, as many as 200 species that have visited our planet. And I think
that's
we have to
just
assume,
visiting us. I mean, there's, if we've got hundreds of species visiting our planet, that tells me that the universe is probably full of millions of different civilizations. Not everybody's going to be coming here. But I think that it's very difficult to separate sort of the different societies. What Whitley's talking about, this sort of uncreative hive mind, that may be biosynthetic organisms that are sent here to do work. Look, as my buddy Paul Hynek says, as far as the aliens go, they're probably not sending their A-team. Whatever program or control system or awakening system that is going on here, it's probably been done on multiple other planets, and it's, sort of grunt work. So why not create an army of biosynthetic, not very creative organisms who are all connected to a hive mind, so they all can work much more efficiently together to do their work here on Earth. And I think it took us a while to sort of figure that out. We took the early drones, biorobotic, biosynthetic, drone organisms to be, a full alien race, when I think that they're actually machines, organic machines designed by an alien race in order to do the work that needs to be done here on Earth. That makes a lot of sense to me. So those guys might not be very creative, but I don't think there's a look. We live in a symbolic order, right? Everything we communicate to the outside world, to other people, has to be done through symbols. We don't have any other way to do it, unless we get into telepathy, where you don't need the web of symbols, where communication would be nonlinear, where you can, as Jim Sparks said, they can think 100 times faster than us because they're free from the web of linear symbols that I need to lay out one by one in order to communicate to you, right? That's a very inefficient way of communicating. So I completely disagree with the statement that non-speakers would be less creative. They would be infinitely more creative, free from the web of a linear language system.
Mm-hmm. So, based upon what you're saying, you would also subscribe probably to the notion that some of the visitors or so-called visitors that we have experienced here are the result of designers who send these beings to our planet specifically in the form that they are in, specifically for the reason of interacting with us, or at least operating within our environment.
Yeah, and according to the microbiologist who came out on Reddit in 2023, and I think that he may have been retired and maybe out of the game for a few years, but what he said essentially holds up as far as I can tell. And he said that the beings that he worked on consisted of they had, I think, 16 chromosomes. Circular sort of genome, and that it was definitely genetically manufactured using human genes and animal genes. So and it makes perfect sense. Come here, collect some samples, create the organisms that you need out of the material that has been evolved to survive on this planet. So you're taking care of a hell of a lot of different physical needs all at once, just by using the indigenous genetics to create your biosynthetic organisms to do work on the planet that you're targeting.
So, I'm curious if you, in your studies, have run across this, and that is the mention of the existence of human body parts in some ET craft crashes.
Yeah.
I heard that relative to the Roswell incident, that one of the things that they didn't want coming out was that they had found some human body parts amongst the wreckage.
I don't know. I mean, it's very difficult to tell. But I do have an opinion on some of that stuff. It's very hard to tell where people are finding it, but say they did, say they are, recycling human, using humans. We don't understand what life is. We don't understand the soul. We don't understand consciousness. We have really strong ideas about abortion. Because of that, we have religious ideas, but we also just don't know, right? And all life is sacred, absolutely. But aliens may look at life a little differently. Think of a sunrise and all the dew on the grass of a field, right? All these individual little droplets and then they burn off and they go up into the atmosphere, and then night comes and they recollect onto the grass, and then the sun comes up and they slowly burn up. That's maybe how aliens would see life. So the difference between one little drop of water and another, there is no difference, So our propensity to divide things up comes from our organic lives as individuals walled off from each other in consciousness. But it's looking like an illusion, like a really strong illusion created by our biological bodies and brains, right?
Yeah.
So if they see something, if they see life in sort of a truer, more holistic manner, then recycling a baby and grinding it up into their molecular blender and redistributing it doesn't mean anything.
I'm interested in the notions that you might have about these created species and the human soul. You were talking a moment ago about souls, and I think again, this is just my opinion, not MUFON's opinion, but my opinion that we do have souls. That's a big part of it. That our consciousness is, but also part of a shared consciousness. And so I'm interested in your take on this. That there's been there's this idea out there that, and I've heard this, I think, through Bob Lazar's readings of the materials that he was exposed to, that some of these visitors, in particular, some of the Greys, view us, they call us containers because we have these souls, and it's something that they don't possess. And so they're trying to understand it. I'm kind of interested in your take on that.
If you were a biosynthetic organism designed to do work, a soul would just get in the way. And know if there are souls, like who would you recruit to do that? Like that's so. I think that you can create a biosynthetic, artificially intelligent organism that doesn't have a soul. But the fact that are they interested in our souls? I don't think so. I think they're doing work for other beings, and they're specifically designed to do the work that they do, and that's their job. The way I have a car, my car is not interested in my soul. It does the work it was designed to do. Now, we have souls of course we do. We're part of a universal intelligence, and does that soul, this little sliver of separation that I'm experiencing, that you're experiencing right now, that one day we will sort of rejoin the great dewdrop in the sky? Does that mean that I will then continue in a reincarnated state? I have no idea. I don't know. And there's good reasons to think that either are true. Either we're all part of one consciousness. We have this experience. We share it. We create novelty. Our job here is to create. and then we rejoin, just like a drop of water in the ocean. That makes a lot of sense to me. Would the same drop of ocean then be, recycled? I don't know.
I've always sort of looked at it like that we are not separate from the universe, but we are a part of the universe. That our ability to perceive our own existence is and our own experiences, that this is all part of the universe experiencing itself, that we are an integral part of a much greater existence, and that the whole purpose, in my view, to being alive is to experience life, not necessarily subject to any particular sort of religious paradigm or idea, because it's completely unrelated to religion, but only related directly to the nature of consciousness and how life works generally.
Yeah, I have to agree. We're certainly. I'll take it one step further, though. Because the idea that we're individuals so that the universe can know itself, right? If everything is one, then you have to separate in order to compare and contrast in order to know what's happening. Absolutely. But I don't think that's the purpose, because you already know when you're one, you already know everything. And then you divide it all up, you still already know anything. Now you're just, sort of playing with all these different pieces. But I like what Terence McKenna said, which is the universe is designed to create novelty and creation. Dividing everything up and then using those parts to put them together in new ways has been the story of the universe. From whatever that was, that proto atom, whatever that was, to the separation of the elements, to them clumping together, and then continuous sort of complexification of the universe seems to be a good description of the past 13.8 billion years. And I think that we're creating novelty, and that's our job.
That it's interesting that you should say that, because I think that one of the ideas that comes out of this, and you may have touched on it earlier, is the notion of a created reality. That we've already sort of talked about the possibility of living in a matrix. And what do you think about the possibility that we are we essentially do this because we need something to do, that we are eternal souls, and that we need to incarnate into these various existences across the universe, sort of as a way of having something to do. And that's why all the rest of the knowledge, the Akashic record, is all blocked out, so that we can experience curiosity and progression and going through different incarnations. What do you think about that?
Well, I think if we were to carry sort of all the experiences of the walls that divide us are there for pretty good reasons, and if we were all to sort of have access to everyone's experience, it's just an overwhelming amount of information that really doesn't help us create new novelty. So I think that separation exists for a reason. There's a balance, I think. Too much separation leads to sort of the matrix that we're living in today, and too much unity, is what's the point of that? Then that's kind of very similar to sort of eternity or heaven, or so somewhere in the middle, and we're not quite there yet. We're a little too much division. We need a little more unity. We need a little more telepathic communication, but not too much. So that we're just sort of like laying around in bliss all the time. We don't want that, but we do, unconditional love all the time. And maybe that's a little too much for us right now, but, we could use a little more unconditional love, because then we'd be able to create better things, more enduring, more sustainable, more loving. But isn't it great that just the subject of whether or not we're being visited by other intelligences opens up all these other doors to the deep questions about reality, life, purpose, function, and society, individuality, souls. It's just it really is the subject. There is no other subject. As Paul Newman said in The Verdict, this is the case. There is no other case.
I agree with you. It's so neat to be able to ask these questions, and this whole thing does open up all these new doors and new avenues to help us. And I think they have helped us learn a little bit more about ourselves, and that's really ultimately what the purpose of life, I think, is. Well, at least part of it anyway, is finding out more about ourselves and maybe learning how truly important we all really are.
Absolutely, yeah, and much more respect for the time that we have here and what we can do together and what we can accomplish together. It doesn't have to be this way. We don't have to be serving masters that are ultimately destructive, in the end. The unsustainable, destructive benefits of very few people at the expense of a hell of a lot of people. It does not have to be this way. We can change it. And I think that is really the main message of MUFON, of this exploration, this questioning of whether or not UFOs are real, whether they're intelligently controlled, and if they are intelligently controlled, then where does that intelligence come from, and what do they want? Why are they here? Carl Sagan said, he was a proponent of the mediocre Earth hypothesis, that there were probably millions or billions of other Earths out there in our galaxy alone. So what would make our Earth so interesting that all these UFO reports would be real? That was his argument. He said, sure, they may have come here over the past, 100,000 years. We may have been visited. Maybe he said 10 million years, 10,000 times, just by a random chance, people zipping around. They might have swung by every now and then. But he didn't see why. He couldn't figure out what would be so interesting about this mediocre speck of dust in this unremarkable part of the galaxy.
Yeah, it's a paradox, because I think that clearly someone, as you know, is interested in us, and probably many more than just one someone's, and for a number of different reasons that we have yet to even fathom. And it may be even that Carl Sagan knew about all that. But Thomas,
it may. I mean, he did. He was interested in the UFO, and as a college student.
Yeah. Well, Thomas, I want you to know that I really appreciate you being here today, and it's been fun. And I'm looking forward to seeing you at the symposium this summer, because you'll have an opportunity there, if you've never been to one, to go and talk about all these sorts of things that you are so interested in. And I know that people are going to be interested in what you have to say. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing you there. And we may, if I'm lucky, I'll be sitting at the same table when we have dinner.
Oh, great. Well, I love that, Rich. Thank you. This was fun. I love talking about this stuff, and it's always good for us to have these conversations, because it helps clarify, our thinking.
Yeah, I completely agree.
I couldn't have this conversation around the dining room table. I wouldn't go as far.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate it, Thomas, and I'll be back in just a few moments with some afterthoughts.
MUFON 2025.
Get the live stream.
Nothing will prepare you for what we are going to reveal. Get the live stream. The Russian materials. The results are in. Bob Spearing.
It also showed signs that it had come in from space, and that it had come in at a fast velocity through our atmosphere. Within the actual substance, there was a crystalline sort of structure to it that seemed to be organic and possibly growing.
The Stringfield Diaries. Early psionics. This is the story of secret government programs designed to interact with non-human beings using psychic abilities and to shoot down craft with a weapon. That weapon was codenamed Government Secrets Exposed. Get the live stream. Michael Schratt. Retrievals of the Third Kind. Thomas Jane.
Technium will take on a life of its own. It'll become its own self-organizing system with goals.
MUFON 2025. Get the live stream. Only $99. That includes a year of access to MUFON TV. Nothing will prepare you for what we are going to reveal. Get the live stream.
Get the live stream. Nothing will prepare you for what we are going to reveal.
Get the live stream. Go to MUFONsymposium.com/now.
Get the live stream. Nothing will prepare you.
Get the live stream.
It is fortunate that we have people of note like Thomas Jane who, in spite of the potential repercussions to their personal and professional lives, come forward to share their experiences. Like many of us who have studied and closely followed the UFO phenomenon, Thomas Jane has undergone a fundamental change in his way of thinking and opened his mind to an entirely new universe of possibilities, a sort of kundalini, if you will. In doing so, he has embarked on a journey of discovery, delving deeply into the UFO phenomenon and the limits of consciousness. In doing so, he encourages others to do the same, to accept that our universe is so much more wondrous, elegant, and complex than we ever imagined. Thomas will be our keynote speaker this year at the MUFON Symposium on Friday night, July 18th in Cincinnati. He's going to talk about hypotheses regarding NHI origins, discuss some lesser-known historical humanoid contact cases, and compare the data with new reports and recent whistleblower accounts. He's also going to discuss newer evidence that offers some tentative conclusions about potential NHI origins. Now, as a reminder, the symposium will take place in Cincinnati from the 17th through the 21st of July 2025, and I truly hope all of you have an opportunity to come by and spend some time with us. Please, you won't regret it. If you're interested in obtaining tickets, just go to MUFONsymposium.com for tickets and information. Thank you for joining us once again, and we'll see you next time right here on the official MUFON podcast.